Hi.
Hello there. We are in Genesis 41 at verse 14. Joseph has successfully interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials, and both of them really, have failed to report to Pharaoh this marvelous man. Mm-hmm. So 2 years goes by until that happens, and then it has to be Pharaoh has a dream of his own before Joseph is brought into his presence. So we're starting at 41:14 in the New King James, is it?
Yes. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine-looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Alas, I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me.
And this from the ESV. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years that the dreams are one. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. The plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. One thing that we should note right away is the pattern of the uses of the divine name. We did say several segments ago that the name starts to disappear in the mid-30s of Genesis. And in the Egyptian segment that we're in now, it never reappears actually in any of the dialogues. Joseph and Pharaoh and the court and the family. The only time it reappears is when we get to the last will and testament of Jacob on his deathbed. So in a private conversation with his sons.
Yeah.
So the covenant name only reappears in the context of Israel's hope for the future. But here, I think it's 5 consecutive names, 5 consecutive times, that is, Joseph uses the name God, Elohim. So is he a good Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah.
And by the light of the witnesses today, you'd have to say, no, he is not. But like Daniel in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, some 1,000+ years later, he's not using the name at all. And then you have to wonder why, because the name is already known here. But then you're reminded that Jesus Christ himself, the greatest of all witnesses, even the witnesses conclude that, never uses the name, as far as we can tell, at all. Whereas Joseph's family does use it somewhat when they're in their own land.
So the Egyptians know he's a Hebrew, so would they know who he served?
Don't know. It certainly never comes up, but they would probably know that the name of the God of Jacob is this peculiar name they've probably never heard before.
A different God than their gods.
Yeah.
They have lots of gods, right? So,
but then you'd have to say, but in a real way, Joseph is more completely a Jehovah's Witness than the Jehovah's Witnesses are.
he is bearing witness about his God, and he's showing them the difference between his God and their gods.
Yeah. He is demonstrating the character of God, not just telling people about the name of God or the character of God. He's actually demonstrating it in what he can do here. But he is demonstrating the omniscience of the Hebrew God. And in the long run, he's demonstrating the omnipotence of the Hebrew God, because this God of the Hebrews obviously knows more about the future than Pharaoh's gods do.
I think it's interesting that when Pharaoh asked him about interpreting dreams and having heard about the fact that he can interpret dreams, he immediately says, it's not me.
Yeah.
It's God. God that can interpret dreams. So he never views himself as special in that sense. He says, God has given you this dream. He's given a revelation to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And he will tell you what it means.
In that, he's like Daniel too. Daniel makes it very clear to Nebuchadnezzar and his successors that it is the God, the Most High God, who does these things. He never uses the Tetragrammaton, but over 20 other names he uses in substitution for it. But there's only one here, and that's Elohim.
Yeah.
So then you do think of the connection with Christ. There's a couple of verses that came to mind in the New World Translation, because even in the New World Translation, they've only managed to get the name Jehovah 5 times into the Gospel of John. There's a link we'll put in at the end about that goes into more detail about this. Well, what's the name by which Jesus of Nazareth designates his Father? Father. Consistently in that. But the 2 verses here are about how Christ proved who he was by demonstrating the character or attributes of God. So I think, is it 14:29, the first one?
So, and I'm reading from the Silver Sword. So now I have told you before it occurs, so that you may believe when it does occur. And 15, you wanted 15?
15:24.
24. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would have no sin. But now they have both seen me and hated me as well as my Father. So
in the truest sense, Jesus was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, although he never calls them by that name, in that he demonstrates the attributes in his person, in his gifts.
Yeah.
It's very visible what the attributes and character of the Hebrew God is.
And it's a similar thing. It's knowing the future.
Yeah. Knowing the future. And here, of course, these 14 years in the future that are being talked about will demonstrate whether the God of the Hebrews is greater than the great gods of Egypt.
It will either vindicate his God or not.
So in a way, he's doing exactly what Jesus did, only it's more protracted. He's saying, by this, they will know, that is, Christ's enemies will know the difference between Jesus Christ and all other prophets, for that matter, because he is doing things that no other prophets ever did. Here's a quote from Delitzsch talking about the difference between the Hebrew God and the gods of Egypt. This is from Franz Delitzsch's commentary on Genesis, one of his last works. And this is volume 2, by the way, so his total contribution was something like 650 or 700 pages on the book of Genesis. Osiris was to the Egyptians the god of the Nile, whose symbol was the bull, and Isis-Hathor, the goddess of the fertile and all-nourishing earth, whose symbol, the cow, was also that of the moon and the lunar year. Hence the interpretation of the king by fruitful or unfruitful years, according to the favor or disfavor of the Nile, was an obvious one. But it needed Joseph's divinely attested insight into the future to answer not only for this apparently obvious and simple interpretation, but also for the results of 14 years.
Mm.
So by the time the 14 years is over, the Egyptians will know for sure that Joseph's God is greater than Osiris
Mm-hmm.
and Isis now.
Yeah.
But it would take Moses, of course, 400 years later to debunk all of the gods of Egypt
Yeah.
by the
So
plagues and the
Yeah,
Exodus.
the plagues. And I remember that being a new insight for me. You know, that what was the purpose of Genesis being written, or Exodus being written even, telling you that whole story and how the plagues happened and what did it accomplish. If you just read it surface, you either collapse it all into a couple of days or months, or you don't realize that what was being judged and destroyed here were the gods of the Egyptians.
Which, by the way, it explicitly says in the Exodus account. By the time you get to the Passover chapter 12,
Mm-hmm.
look at verse 12 where it says that God judged the gods of Egypt in this event. And
Yeah.
here you wouldn't know it at all because it never mentions this in
Mm-hmm.
the text.
Yeah.
But in effect, Osiris and Isis, the two greatest Egyptian gods, are being measured by a new standard now.
Mm-hmm.
And their power is being obviously
challenged. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh knows it
Yeah.
right away.
Mm.
What are the links?
We are linking to a video. It's one about John comparing Joseph and Jesus in their relation to the use of the name. So it's Ask JWs. It's number 4 of that series. Where is Jehovah in the Gospel of John? And we'll put in the playlist for
Ask JWs.
Ask JWs. Yeah.
Good.
As well.
See you next time.
Mm-hmm.